April 14, 1943. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, a restless gray under a sky thick with clouds. Waves crashed against the hull of the cargo ship SS Meridian, rocking it like a child's cradle. The crew moved with practiced precision, each step. Careful, eyes darting to the horizon, ears straining for the faintest creak, the whisper of a periscope slicing through the waves. War was not just a distant echo, here it was a living, breathing threat, hidden beneath the rolling waters below. Deck, the scent of frying bacon and stale coffee mixed with the salty tongue of the sea. In the galley, the ship's cook, Harold Wild Bill McKinney, danced between pots and pans with an energy that seemed almost reckless. He was small in stature, wiry and sun-browned, with a shock of hair that never stayed in place. Known for his impulsive ideas and eccentric decisions, he had earned the nickname Wild, not for bravery, but for the constant chaos he left in his wake. The crew often shook their heads at his antics, but today even they could sense something. Unspoken in the air, the tension on the ship was thick. Captain Reynolds paced the bridge, a cigarette dangling loosely from his lips. Every sonar ping or distant splash made the men stiffen, their muscles coiled, ready for the unseen hunter lurking beneath. German U-boats prowled these waters, invisible predators that had already claimed dozens of Allied vessels this week. Fear had become a constant companion on the Meridian, whispering through the crew like the wind over the rigging in the mess. Hall, Harold tossed a frying pan, catching it mid-air with a grin. "Relax, boys. Ain't no fish out there gonna sink us today," he said, laughter masking the tension. Yet even his bravado couldn't shake the unease pressing on everyone's shoulders. The men ate in silence, listening for the distant thrum of engines or the ominous warning of a nearby sub. Harold's wildness seemed harmless, a quirk in the face of overwhelming fear, but there was something almost magnetic about him, an unpredictable spark that made people watch. Half amused, half-anxious. Outside, the Atlantic swelled violently, and the Meridian tilted, groaning under the strain of the waves. Somewhere beneath the surface, a predator moved silently, calculating its moment. The ship creaked and rattled, a wooden and steel heartbeat pounding against the relentless sea. Down in the galley, Harold hummed an old tune, flipping eggs and stirring soup, completely aware yet seemingly oblivious to the lurking danger. He had a knack for noticing things others didn't, shifts in wind, subtle changes in the water, the tiniest ripple that hinted at a shadow below. The men whispered about the toll of the war. Letters from home, the worry for wives, children, and families, and the knowledge that death could arrive without warning weighed heavily on them. Harold, though, carried a different energy. He was not naive, he understood danger, but he refused to let fear dominate him. It was this fearless, chaotic spirit that would soon become the difference between life and death. As night began to fall, the horizon bled into a deep, inky black. The first stars appeared, faint, trembling lights over the restless ocean. Captain Reynolds adjusted his binoculars, scanning the water, tension coiling like a spring. Below deck, Harold placed a final pot on the stove and wiped his hands on a rag, staring thoughtfully at the waves through a porthole. Something felt off, something subtle, almost imperceptible. A flicker in the water, a shadow in the moonlight. Most would have dismissed it. Harold did not, for now the crew ate, laughed nervously, and followed their routines. But the night was far from calm. Somewhere beneath them, steel waited in the dark, and one man's impulsive instincts, the so-called wild decisions of a ship's cook, were about to collide with the quiet menace of the Atlantic. In a way no one could have predicted, and as the waves rose higher and the wind screamed across the deck, Harold McKinney finished his shift, rolled up his sleeves, and whispered to himself, "Let's see what trouble we can stir tonight." The calm before the storm had ended. The morning after Harold's quiet observation of the Atlantic dawned gray and overcast, with a chill that seeped into every corner of the Meridian. The sea stretched endlessly, a rolling canvas of slate waves that reflected the unease of every man aboard. Life on a cargo ship in the middle of the Atlantic during wartime was a strange mixture of monotony and terror. Days were marked by repetitive tasks, checking the engines, inspecting the cargo, scrubbing decks, and, perhaps most importantly, listening. Listening for the faintest disturbance, the subtle ping of sonar, the ghostly echo of a distant explosion, the whisper of the wind that sometimes carried warnings of danger. In the galley, Harold McKinney moved with a rhythm all his own. He was a whirlwind of motion, flipping pancakes with one hand while chopping vegetables with the other. To the crew, his eccentricities were a constant source of both amusement and irritation. "Bill, how do you not burn this place down every day?" muttered Petty Officer Lang, a tall, stoic man with a sharp eye for detail. Harold grinned, waving a spatula like a conductor's baton. "Lang, if I wanted boring, I'd be polishing floors. Now taste this, it'll wake your soul before the U-boats get you." Life aboard the ship had its own rhythm, and the crew had developed rituals to survive the tension. They joked, argued over trivial things, and played cards during lulls. But beneath the laughter there was an undercurrent of anxiety. Every creak of the hull, every unexpected shift in the wind reminded them of the lurking German submarines that prowled beneath the waves. Harold seemed to float above it all, a chaotic energy that both annoyed and inspired. He had an uncanny ability to notice things others missed, a subtle change in the water, the way a wave rolled differently, a shadow that lingered too long. It was during one of these ordinary days that the Meridian's monotony was shattered. A faint ping, almost imperceptible, sounded from the sonar room. Lieutenant Harris, the ship's communications officer, stiffened. "Sonar," he muttered, and the crew froze, listening. Every man instinctively knew the drill. Check, report, brace. Harold, meanwhile, leaned against the galley counter, casually stirring a pot of soup, his sharp eyes flicking toward the porthole. Most would have dismissed the flicker of shadow in the waves as a trick of the light. Harold did not. Tensions rose when small conflicts erupted among the men. Fatigue, fear, and close quarters amplified minor irritations. Deckhand Miller accused Gunner Brooks of leaving a hatch unsecured, while Brooks retorted with a pointed reminder of Miller's clumsiness during the last storm. Captain Reynolds intervened, his voice calm but firm, reminding everyone that unity meant survival. Harold, standing to the side, quietly diffused tension with a quip or a small act of cleverness, fetching water for a heated crew member, improvising a repair with spare rope, simple gestures that earned him grudging respect. Despite the danger, moments of levity punctuated the long hours. Harold once convinced a group of men to play a game using empty cans and scraps of rope, turning the cargo deck into a makeshift bowling alley. Laughter echoed across the waves, a fragile shield against fear. Yet even in these moments, Harold remained alert. He noticed the way the clouds moved, the subtle changes in the swell, the pattern of seabirds that circled above. He was a cook, yes, but also a man whose instincts were finely tuned to the ocean's moods, a skill that would soon prove invaluable. Meals were both a necessity and a form of comfort. Harold's hands moved with practiced efficiency, chopping, stirring, and flipping, all while keeping a keen eye on the crew. He listened, observed, and learned the moods of every man aboard. Petty Officer Lang, for instance, had a nervous tic when a ship passed in the distance, and Harold would place a fresh cup of coffee in front of him without a word. These small acts of attentiveness, this eccentric attentiveness, quietly bound the crew together. Harold's wildness, though often questioned, had a method born of survival. As the day dragged on, the Meridian rocked steadily under the weight of the Atlantic swells. Waves crashed over the bow, spilling water across the deck and soaking the men who ventured outside. The wind howled, rattling the rigging, and somewhere beneath the surface, the Atlantic hid its silent predators. The crew went about their duties with practiced caution, each man aware that the next ping from sonar could mean a deadly encounter. Harold moved among them like a ghost of energy, cleaning, cooking, repairing, noticing things others overlooked, often dismissed as simple eccentricity, but in reality, an instinct honed by survival and intuition. By evening, the sun barely pierced the heavy clouds, casting a dim, gray light across the ship. Harold paused, leaning against the rail, staring at the horizon. The subtle shift in the waves caught his attention, a ripple that seemed out of place, a shadow moving beneath the water. His stomach tightened. The crew, oblivious to the signal he perceived, laughed and joked, unaware of what might be approaching. Harold's mind raced through possibilities, weighing actions, imagining outcomes. The cook, who had seemed impulsive and chaotic, was now the quiet observer. The mind that might one day make a decision that could save every life aboard the Meridian. And as darkness fell, the distant hum of engines reached the ears of the crew. Somewhere out there, hidden in the waves, was a hunter. Harold McKinney didn't panic. He watched, he observed, and he prepared. For though the day had been long and filled with routine, he knew, deep in his gut, that the Atlantic had secrets tonight, and that soon his so-called wild instincts would be tested in a way none of them could have imagined. The night deepened, and the Meridian drifted through a sea that felt alive with shadows. Each wave seemed to whisper threats, and the wind carried a low, constant moan that rattled through the ship's timbers. The crew was restless, sensing unease but unsure of its source. Below deck, Harold McKinney moved with quiet purpose, wiping down counters, sharpening knives, and checking supplies, but his eyes never left the portholes. Something in the water, the rhythm, the ripple, the subtle movement was wrong. It began with a faint sonar ping, almost imperceptible, bouncing through the ship like a heartbeat. Lieutenant Harris's face stiffened as he leaned over the instrument panel, listening intently. "Contact," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it was enough. A shiver passed through the crew. German U-boats were prowling the Atlantic, and any detection could mean death. The men stiffened, each one recalling the stories of ships swallowed whole, convoys disappearing without a trace. Captain Reynolds barked orders, precise and urgent. "All hands, battle stations, sound alarms. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The crew scrambled, their training taking over. Hatches were secured, guns checked, and every man moved with tense efficiency. Yet amid the disciplined chaos, Harold paused. He didn't move like the others. He didn't follow the checklist. Instead, he leaned close to a porthole, eyes scanning the waves. The shadow beneath the surface wasn't just a blip on sonar, it was real, moving with purpose, a predator sizing up its prey. The ship's guns rumbled to life, and the crew's hearts pounded with fear. The air was thick with salt, smoke from the engine, and the acrid tang of sweat. The Meridian tilted sharply as Captain Reynolds ordered a sudden turn, attempting to throw the U-boat off course. The men held on, bracing themselves against the lurch, their knuckles white on railings and gun handles. And yet, through the chaos, Harold noticed the little things. The change in the water's reflection, the way the waves bent unnaturally around the bow, the flicker of a shadow that shouldn't have been there. "Captain," Harold called, stepping out from the galley, voice calm but urgent. "The sonar isn't picking it up right, but it's close. Closer than you think." The captain looked at him, eyes narrowing. "McKinney, stay in the galley. This is not your concern." Harold didn't argue. Instead, he observed. Every instinct, every ounce of his chaotic energy was focused on what the men couldn't yet see. The U-boat was circling, silent, waiting for the perfect angle to strike. The crew's attention was divided. Some manned the guns, some scanned the horizon, and others whispered prayers under their breath. Fear had become a tangible thing, wrapping itself around the ship like the thick fog rolling in from the east. Suddenly, a small incident shattered the fragile calm. A crate slipped from its moorings, crashing against the deck with a thunderous bang. The noise echoed over the water, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Crew members froze, hearts in their throats, imagining the shadow beneath the waves reacting to the sound. Harold acted instinctively, catching the crate just before it hit another stack, securing it with a rope in a way that no protocol had demanded. A simple, impulsive act, but in that moment, it highlighted exactly why his instincts mattered. Minutes dragged like hours. The boat was patient, silent, calculating. Every man aboard the Meridian felt it, the predator beneath them, waiting, watching, deciding. The stormy night offered no comfort. The waves could hide the submarine or reveal it, depending on its mood. Harold's mind raced. He thought of decoys, diversions, any tactic that might confuse the enemy. Normally, these ideas would have been dismissed by the captain or the officers, but tonight, the unusual instincts of a ship's cook might be the only thing standing. Between survival and disaster. The tension reached a peak when another sonar ping sounded closer this time. The men froze. Captain Reynolds shouted for evasive maneuvers. But Harold noticed the subtle difference in the eco. The U-boat wasn't attacking yet. It was stalking, testing, hesitating. He realized that a moment of misstep could invite disaster. The crew followed orders, but Harold's mind was working in ways the drills never covered. He saw patterns, signs, and possibilities that no manual accounted for, patterns that could decide whether the Meridian would survive the night. As the minutes stretched on, the U-boat moved into position. The tension was unbearable. Sweat poured down the men's faces, muscles ached from bracing against the deck, and hearts pounded as if threatening to burst. Harold stood silently, staring at the water, knowing that the next decision, his decision, would either save the ship or doom it. He had no authority, no official role in the battle, but instinct told him that waiting for orders might be too late. Something had to be done, and it had to be done now. And as the shadow beneath the waves grew larger, circling closer to the unsuspecting cargo ship, Harold's hands clenched, his mind racing with possibilities. The cook, who had seemed reckless, chaotic, and wild, was about to step into a role no one expected. Tonight, the Meridian's fate would rest not just on the drills and the guns, but on the instincts of one man who had always walked his own path. The boat lingered, silent and patient, just below the surface. Every man aboard the Meridian could feel its presence, yet none fully understood what it would take to survive. All except Harold. He knew, deep in his gut, that the moment for action was near, and that the choices he made in the next few minutes could determine life or death for everyone on board. The night was thick with fog, the Meridian rocking gently, yet ominously under the heavy swell of the Atlantic. The U-boat hovered beneath the waves like a silent predator, circling, testing, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the ship, every distant splash, felt amplified in the eerie stillness. The crew was tense, rigid, following drills, their eyes darting nervously to the dark horizon. And yet, amid the disciplined panic, Harold McKinney moved with quiet resolve. He had no rank, no authority, and no formal training in naval combat. All he had were instincts honed by years at sea, sharpened by the chaos of life aboard the Meridian. And right now, instinct screamed at him that conventional measures, following orders to the letter, would not be enough. The U-boat was too close, too clever, and too patient. If they continued as they were, the ship would be sitting duck. Harold's eyes scanned the deck, the shadows, the waves. Then, with a sudden clarity, he saw a possibility that others had overlooked. It was risky, almost certainly against protocol, and terrifying in its unpredictability. The ship's lights, dimmed for stealth, could be manipulated to create confusion. The engine noise could be altered, creating phantom movements in the water. Even the loose cargo and decoys could be strategically deployed to suggest false positions. The plan was unconventional, perhaps reckless, but it was their only chance. "Captain," Harold shouted, cutting through the tension like a spark. "I need to do this. Trust me, it's the only way to throw them off." The officers froze. Captain Reynolds turned sharply, his face a mask of disbelief. "McKinney, what are you talking about? You can't just—" "I can," Harold interrupted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through him. "It's now or never. If we wait, we're done for." For a moment, silence fell over the deck. The men exchanged uncertain glances. This was the ship's cook, eccentric, impulsive, and untrained in battle-taking command of a life-or-death situation. Fear and incredulity collided in the air. But there was a determination in Harold's eyes that no one could ignore. Something primal, intuitive, and impossible to argue with. He moved quickly, flipping switches, adjusting the dimmed lights to create erratic flashes that shimmered across the foggy waves. He barked orders to a few trusted crew members who followed reluctantly, hearts hammering with fear and uncertainty. They shifted cargo, rigged ropes to create decoys bobbing unnaturally in the water, and adjusted engine sounds to produce misleading vibrations beneath the hull. Every action was bold, dangerous, and entirely untested in actual combat. The U-boat, sensing the sudden anomalies, reacted immediately. Sonar pings bounced back confusingly, echoing off the decoys and false signals. From below the submarine, Commander would have seen an unpredictable pattern, lights flickering, shadows dancing, engine noise shifting unpredictably. Harold's wild instincts were creating chaos in the mind of a hunter trained to calculate, plan, and strike with deadly precision. The crew, initially frozen in shock, began to understand the brilliance hidden in the madness. Gunner Brooks glanced at Harold, disbelief still etched on his face. He might actually pull this off, he muttered under his breath. Petty Officer Lang, tense and skeptical just moments ago, now worked with quiet urgency, following Harold's improvisations. With precision, the chaotic energy of one man was translating into a coordinated, if unconventional, defense. Minutes stretched, each second heavy with suspense. The U-boat circled closer, and the crew could hear the faint hum of its engines beneath the waves. Every man held his breath, waiting for the inevitable torpedoes, gunfire, death. But Harold didn't hesitate. He doubled down on his improvisations, alternating lights, shifting decoys, and varying engine noises. The water shimmered strangely, the fog glimmered with the illusion of movement, and the predator beneath the waves became disoriented, then a subtle pause in the U-boat's movement. The men on deck didn't notice at first, focused, as they were on the ship and their tasks. But Harold's instincts were perfect. He could feel the hesitation, the subtle change in the water, the brief pause in the sonar echoes. The enemy had been fooled, misled by chaos, uncertainty, and a wild decision born of courage and intuition. For the first time since the tension had begun, a flicker of hope ignited among the crew. They worked faster, hearts pounding, following Harold's lead. Each movement, each adjustment was met with the silent approval of the ocean itself. It was a tense dance of survival, orchestrated not by training or protocol, but by the instincts of a cook who refused to let fear dictate the outcome. And as the minutes dragged on, the Meridian began to slip from the U-boat's grasp, the enemy's. Patience faltered, confusion rippling through its systems. Harold's gamble, reckless to some, wild to all, had created the perfect storm of deception. The crew could sense it, though they did not yet fully understand. The cook who had been laughed at, dismissed, and called eccentric was now the architect of their survival, and yet, as Harold adjusted the lights one last time, and a decoy crate shifted just so, he knew the night was far from over. The predator, beneath the waves, was still there, still calculating, and still deadly. But for now, for this moment, the Meridian had a fighting chance. And that chance, improbable as it seemed, had been carved by a man no one expected, a cook with a wild heart, instinct sharper than steel, and courage that defied logic. The night had grown colder, the fog thicker, and the Atlantic darker than ink. Every wave that crashed against the Meridian felt like a warning, every creak of the timbers like a whispered threat. The crew clung to their stations, hearts pounding, muscles taut. Below the surface, the U-boat circled like a shark, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The hunter had been misled, its sonar echoing confusing signals, lights flickering unpredictably, and decoys bobbing in strange patterns. Harold McKinney's wild plan was in motion, but no one dared assume the danger was over. A sudden vibration ran through the deck as the U-boat moved closer, its engines thrumming faintly beneath the water. Lieutenant Harris scanned the sonar. Desperately, bearing 34? It's approaching fast. His voice was tense, controlled, but betraying the fear curling in his chest. The crew stiffened. The engines groaned as Captain Reynolds barked new orders, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. All hands, brace for impact. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The Meridian lurched as the captain turned the wheel sharply, sending water spraying across the deck. The men clutched railings and gun handles, faces pale, knuckles white. The night air was filled with the roar of the waves, the hiss of the wind, and the panicked shouting of crew members coordinating gun positions and decoy adjustments. For a moment, it felt as if the sea itself had joined in the panic, thrashing and shaking the ship in rhythm with the fear aboard. Harold moved among them, calm and precise, his eyes fixed on the water. Every adjustment he made shifting the lights, moving a decoy crate, signaling a slight change in engine speed was calculated instinct. To the crew, it seemed chaotic, almost reckless. Yet slowly, the pattern became clear. The U-boat's approach wavered. It hesitated, its attack faltering, confused by the combination of deception and erratic movement. Harold's gamble was working. Sudden thud echoed from the deck as a crate slipped again, sending a jolt of fear through the men. "Careful!" shouted Gunner Brooks, grabbing it just in time. Harold nodded, gripping a rope to steady himself. These small moments were critical. Every distraction, every minor misstep could have been fatal, yet Harold's improvisation kept the chaos controlled. From below the surface, the U-boat adjusted its position, torpedoes ready, and crew members hunched over sonar panels, trying to make sense of the confusing signals. It was a deadly dance, invisible and deadly, and the crew of the Meridian felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing second. Adrenaline surged through every man aboard. Fear was not just in their hearts, it was a living, breathing entity, sharpening senses, quickening reflexes, and demanding immediate action. "Now!" Harold shouted, moving to adjust another decoy. He had noticed a slight pattern in the U-boat's movement, a momentary hesitation. Timing was everything. With a deft motion, he released one crate, causing it to drift toward the starboard side, while another was pulled forward to create the illusion of a false path. Lights flickered erratically, shadows danced across the foggy water and the engine. Noises shifted unpredictably. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to freeze. The crew held their breath, waiting for the inevitable, the torpedo, the explosion, the death that lurked below. Then movement. The boat's trajectory faltered. The torpedo, aimed at what it thought was the Meridian, veered away, misled by Harold's orchestrated chaos. A low cheer whispered across the deck, quickly swallowed by the wind, as the crew realized what had happened, but there was no time to celebrate. Another wave struck violently, throwing men off balance. Deckhands scrambled, shouting, securing loose equipment, checking guns, and adjusting decoys. Every second was a fight, every breath precious. Harold's wild, unorthodox maneuvers had bought them time. But the predator beneath the waves was still there, still hunting. Still deadly. Captain Reynolds finally allowed himself a glance at Harold, disbelief etched on his face. "McKinney, I don't understand." "How?" Harold didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the horizon, reading the water, the shadows, the waves. Actions mattered more than words now. Every movement of the Meridian was a continuation of his plan, a calculated improvisation that depended on instinct rather than training. The U-boat circled again, testing, probing, but the deception held. Its attack attempts became hesitant. Indecisive, faltering under the pressure of unpredictability, the crew began to notice the pattern. Slowly, cautiously, they understood that the chaos Harold had sown was working. Murmurs of hope replaced whispers of fear. They followed his lead, adjusting decoys, watching lights, mimicking movements. What had begun as terror was transforming into tense, precise coordination. Guided by the wild instincts of a man they had underestimated, minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The U-boat moved off slightly, retreating into the depths, its attack foiled, at least for now. Relief washed over the deck, mingled with lingering fear. The adrenaline that had gripped every man's chest eased just enough to let them breathe, though not entirely. They were still at the mercy of the Atlantic, still shadowed by an unseen enemy, but for the moment, survival was theirs. Harold leaned against the railing, breathing heavily, every muscle tense yet alive with the exhilaration of the gamble. The ship was safe for now. The cook, who had seemed reckless, chaotic, and foolish, had orchestrated a defense that saved lives, demonstrating that courage and instinct could outmatch fear and precision, and though the night was far from over, the Meridian had survived the U-boat's first assault. The predator below the waves had been confused, misled, and for a fleeting moment, outsmarted by the wild decision of a single man who refused to accept the ordinary rules of survival. The fog began to lift, revealing a calm, silver-gray sea that belied the chaos of the night. The Meridian floated almost serenely now, though every man aboard carried the echo of adrenaline in his chest, muscles still taut, minds unwilling to fully relax. The distant threat of the U-boat had receded, leaving behind only the lingering tension of survival. The storm of fear had passed, but its memory clung stubbornly to the crew. Below deck, Harold McKinney finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. His hands, still slightly trembling from exertion, wiped down the counter, the hum of the galley stove the only sound breaking the silence. Around him, the crew was moving slowly, cautiously, each man processing the night in his own way. Some slumped in the mess hall, staring at the floor as if trying to reconcile reality with the terror they had just endured. Others whispered quietly, voices hushed in reverence for a survival they barely understood. Captain Reynolds emerged from the bridge, shoulders heavy with relief yet still rigid with command. He moved toward Harold, a slow, measured step that conveyed both disbelief and admiration. "McKinney," he said, voice low but steady, "I don't know how to thank you. That was beyond reckless." But it worked. It actually worked. Harold shrugged, a faint, modest smile on his lips. "I just did what seemed right at the moment, sir, nothing more." Yet the crew knew it had been more. It wasn't just luck or chance, it was instinct, courage, and the audacity to act when hesitation could have meant death. Petty Officer Lang, still leaning against the bulkhead with a mug of coffee, shook his head in amazement. "I can't believe it. The cook, of all people, he saved us." His voice carried awe and a newfound respect. On deck, men moved quietly, checking equipment, securing cargo, and assessing the minor damage from the earlier chaos. The night's tension had given way to cautious relief, though the Atlantic remained unpredictable, its waves a constant reminder of the lurking dangers beneath. The crew exchanged glances that spoke volumes, shared understanding, gratitude, and a subtle recognition that one man's wild instincts had made the difference between life and death. Harold moved among them, offering assistance here, a word of reassurance there. He had never sought praise, yet it followed him like a shadow now, quiet but undeniable. Deckhand Miller approached him cautiously, scratching at the back of his neck. "Bill, I thought we were done for. I didn't think it would work." Harold placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. "Sometimes you've got to trust what you see, not just what you're told. The ocean will show you the truth if you're paying attention." The crew began to share their reflections, recounting moments where fear had threatened to paralyze them and where Harold's quick thinking had steered them through. Gunner Brooks admitted that he had doubted every move, yet each adjustment Harold made had been precise, almost surgical in its execution. Each man's story reinforced the reality of their survival, not chance, not luck, but a combination of courage, instinct, and the audacity to act when others hesitated. Captain Reynolds finally gathered the crew, standing on the deck as the first pale hints of dawn lit the horizon. "Tonight, every man here survived because of quick thinking, coordination, and courage. And one man, whose job was never to lead or command, showed us what bravery truly means, Harold McKinney." His voice carried over the gentle waves, steady and reverent. The men nodded, some murmuring their agreement, others clapping quietly. Still too stunned to fully celebrate, Harold felt a mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and a quiet pride that was unfamiliar but deeply satisfying. He had acted, not for recognition, not for glory, but because instinct demanded it. The chaotic energy that had earned him his nickname had, in a single night, saved lives. And though he remained modest, the crew could no longer dismiss him as merely eccentric. He had become a symbol of courage, resourcefulness, and the power of trusting one's instincts. As the ship settled into a cautious rhythm for the remainder of the night, the men shared quiet moments of laughter and reflection. The terror had passed, replaced by an uneasy relief. The Atlantic remained vast, mysterious, and dangerous, But for now, the Meridian had survived, and the memory of Harold's wild decision would linger long after the waves had calmed in the quiet of the galley. Harold cleaned the last of the pots and paused at the porthole. The sea stretched endlessly, still and silver beneath the early morning light. He allowed himself a small, private smile. Tonight had been dangerous, terrifying even, but it had been proof that sometimes a single bold act could change the course of fate. The storm had passed, the immediate danger averted. Yet the memory of it, the fear and the courage, would stay with them forever. Weeks passed, and the Atlantic gradually returned to its indifferent rhythm. The Meridian continued its journey, each wave carrying the memory of that night in silent, rolling currents. For the crew, life slowly returned to a fragile routine. But the story of Harold McKinney's wild decision had already begun to take root in their minds. What had seemed reckless and chaotic in the moment was now understood, as the precise act that saved them all. Letters home became a lifeline for many. Petty Officer Lang wrote of the terror and awe, describing the cook's decisive actions with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "You won't believe it," he wrote. "It wasn't the guns, it wasn't the captain, it was the cook, Wild Bill. He saved the ship. He saved all of us. I've never seen anything like it." Others echoed the sentiment in their letters, recounting the night with vivid detail, highlighting the courage, intuition, and audacity that had carried them through near-certain death. Back on land, historians would later reference the Meridian's survival as a remarkable instance of ingenuity under fire, a story of survival that defied conventional expectation. The U-boat logs, captured years later, noted a confusing series of decoys and unpredictable movements that foiled an attack movements that would later be attributed to the improvised brilliance of a single fearless man. Harold's reputation grew quietly, the kind that did not demand medals or ceremonies, but lived in whispered respect and the enduring memory of those he had saved. Harold himself remained humble. He never sought recognition, never boasted of the lives he had protected. To him, it had been instinct, courage, and the need to act when hesitation could have meant death. Yet, in every quiet smile from a grateful crew member, in every nod of respect, he understood the weight of what had been achieved. Sometimes the greatest heroes were not officers or soldiers, but ordinary people whose instincts, intuition, and daring courage shaped history in the smallest and most profound ways. Years later, the surviving crew would recall the night in hushed tones, speaking of fear and chaos, but always returning to Harold McKinney, the cook whose impulsive, wild decisions had turned near disaster into survival. His story became a quiet legend among sailors, a testament to the power of unconventional thinking, the courage to act when others hesitated, and the hidden heroes who walked among them, unnoticed yet extraordinary. And as the Atlantic waves continued to roll, indifferent and eternal, the memory of one wild decision lived on, echoing through time, that sometimes survival, bravery, and heroism come not from orders or training, but from the instinct and courage of a single unassuming man.